So it's usually not a good sign when a military has to lie about progress on the front lines. It's a lesson that Russia has learned the hard way more than once, but it seemingly didn't connect because they just did it again. Pretty egregious, all things considered. 5 different instances from the Russian Ministry of Defense this past weekend. They just made things up that do not line up with reality. They are so far-fetched that even Russian analysts are saying, guys, dial it back. What are you doing here? This doesn't help anyone. In fact, this isn't just a PR move that maybe some people in Moscow like to see. It actually hurts the Russian military and benefits Ukraine. It makes it that much harder for Russia to continue advancing and is the type of thing that Ukraine can use to their advantage to retake territory. We've seen it before. We're going to get into how that plays out here in a moment. But starting out, this was an announcement from the Russian Ministry of Defense, specifically General Gerasimov, the Russian chief of the General Staff, where he was talking about the West troop grouping conducting offensive operations in its area of responsibility along the front line of around 350 kilometers. And we're going to get into each one of the 5 claims made by Gerasimov that, again, Russians are pushing back on, going, dude, come on, what are you doing here? We've got sources from Russia, we've got some Ukrainians, and then we've got some geolocated footage to combat this as well. I'm going to start with a look at a map, and we're going to use Suryak map today. So this is a map that generally is a little more favorable towards Russian claims, a little more skeptical of Ukrainian claims. So this is not like a Ukrainian mapping service or a Ukrainian product, kind of the opposite. And even these guys, they're like, we can't back up some of these Russian claims. So starting out, we've got the Russian Ministry of Defense saying units of the 6th Army are advancing in the western direction from Kupyansk in the general direction of Shevchenkovo. Whew, butchered that one for sure. All right, so zooming in here to Kupyansk. This is an area that Russia still does not hold, and it's kind of great that Kupyansk is actually the first one that comes up here because, first off, they do not have all of Kupyansk now, but this is a poster child for what happens when Russia lies about progress. Bottom line up front, it puts their troops in a very, very difficult position because their commanders say, why do you need strikes there? Why do you need reinforcements? Didn't you already take that? And the troops forward end up getting encircled and killed, and they can't fend for themselves anymore. So anyways, here we've got Kupyansk. Gerasimov says that this area over here is where they're advancing to. There's no evidence to support a Russian advance west of Kupyansk. And this is what's so interesting about this one. This recent claim from Gerasimov, I don't know where it's coming from. Just completely made up. Each one of these 5 that we're going to run through, it's not like each of these were on the verge of falling and he just got a little bit ahead of it, right? Like he prematurely announced the fall of Pokrovsk, but Pokrovsk was already, 90% held by Russia or something like that. No, he's just grabbing random areas and saying like, yeah, we have now taken that territory. Like it's comical and is genuinely going to be an issue for the Russian military. So moving on to the other ones here, he says units of the 1st Tank Army have liberated the settlement of Borovaya. So we're going to move south on the map here a little ways. Here we go. Borovaya, right here along the Oskil River. Again, no evidence that this happened. The closest we can come on this one was actually a Rybar map that just came out yesterday. They updated theirs. So they were in that first group saying, hey, MOD, stop making these claims. What do you want us to do with this? And then they got on board. They updated their map and said, okay, now there's actually fighting around it, which is, not the same as when Gerasimov here said that it has been liberated, as in Russia took the entire settlement of Borova, but it's kind of moving in that direction. Who knows? Maybe somebody gave him a call and said, you gotta update that map there, man. Anyways, this one was actually disputed with some video evidence. So Russia released a video showing that they had cleared and taken this village, but Zome, a username over on X, put together some geolocation based off of this footage where he said that the Russian 4th Tank Division of the 1st Guards Tank Army captured Borova, but they got lost and they liberated this other area for the 3rd time. And the area he looks at, Kolmachanka or something, I'm going to be really bad with the names today, was like 20 kilometers away. So in Russia's video claiming that they took over this area that nobody was even watching, they used footage from an area 20, 25 kilometers away. Why? We're in a weird spot right now. Now, I do want to mention that Zome and his team, they've actually got a fundraiser going right now. I'm not associated with this one at all, but using their work, so want to give these guys a shout out. They're picking up some vans for Hartia, which is actually doing a lot of fighting over in that direction. So we'll have the link to this campaign. Big goal of 100,000, but they're well on their way. They're smashing it already. 30,000 raised of 100,000 to support those guys and to support Hartia. Again, some of the dudes fighting back in this specific area of Ukraine. That fundraiser will be linked in the description below. But let's continue on with the Russian fairy tales from a few days ago. The MOD said street battles are continuing in Shikovka, where more than half of the settlement's territory is controlled by our assault units. So we'll just move a little bit to the south here. Again, what? Like, these are not areas that are being contested right now. Like, so the idea that this settlement on the west is completely under Russian control and this one here is heavily contested, like, it just doesn't line up with anything. There's no evidence to support that. They said, oh, this is a good one. They said the 20th Army, having completed the liberation of Luhansk, is advancing on a wide front. So, like, I don't know. This is a mix of, it's kind of a big deal. Also, like, it's not a huge amount of territory. This is what remains of Luhansk. You can see it kind of called out here on the screen. Russia has taken something like 98+% of Luhansk at this point. So, like, this is one where, yeah, it's kind of close. You can see this territory here, and then a little further south is really all that remains of Luhansk that is not held by Russia. But there also haven't, like, been any advances there recently. This isn't a major area of focus for Russia. Again, no documentation of any significant buildup of Russian forces or advancing in this area. So, again, just throw it out there. Just like, I guess we'll just pretend that all of Luhansk is taken now. And then the last one here, before we get into some of the pushback and the jokes being made by Ukrainians at Russia's behalf, they say assault units of the 25th Army continue street battles to liberate Krasny Liman, a major administrative center and railway junction. 85% of the city's territory is under our control. The destruction of the Ukrainian armed forces is ongoing. So Krasny Liman, we'll zoom out a little bit and then straight down into Donetsk. Like, this is a tough area. No doubt. And there is a lot of heavy fighting going on here. But suggesting that Liman is 85% held by Russians at this point, it's not even backed up by other Russian sources. Like, nobody's claiming that. We're starting to see fighting on the outskirts of town, which, like, maybe, you know, Russia tends to advance, is kind of what we've seen over the course of this war. And the fact that they're on the edge of Liman kind of suggests that at some point they probably will have some control over that town. That's just the direction the war has gone. Right now, saying that 85% of Liman is under Russian control, again, is just completely made up. They're taking every one of these things and extrapolating it out to what they wish it could be in 5, 6, 10 months' time. Now, some of the pushback we got here, some great pushback from Russian sources. Military informant said, quote, not a single domestic mapping project recorded even a stable presence of Russian armed forces in the populated area, talking about Borova again, let alone full establishment of control over it. He said the lack of reaction to the situation in Kupyansk made it clear that this can continue. Soon, according to the reports, we will take Kharkiv. So again, great that Kupyansk is involved again here. And, you know, let's jump to that real quick. So this is kind of the poster child of what happens when Russia exaggerates claims. This was last fall. Russia had claimed ownership, taken over all of Kupyansk right here in the middle of the screen. They had not. And Putin actually, strangely, this is like one of the only times he's done this, went on camera and said, hey, I invite international news media to show up out there because Ukraine was saying you don't actually hold this territory. And he was so confident. He invited international reporters and nobody took him up on it. But what we found out then in the next couple of weeks was Ukraine kicked off a counteroffensive or localized counterattack in this area and kind of routed a lot of the Russians that were able to get into Kupyansk, but then were cut off and couldn't get resupplied and were slowly routed. So the issue that they ran into there is what they could likely run into elsewhere at this point. So first off, I do want to stress that, like, war is confusing. There's a fog of war element, no doubt. It's entirely possible that we in the public are behind in terms of the updates coming out. But the idea that 4+ years into this war, there are 5 locations that we are so behind that there's not any footage and not a single mapping service, nothing caught up, is odd. I mean, there's a lot of drone footage, right? And a lot of drone strikes. The fact that there's no footage to back up any one of those 5 MOD claims and that they're all pretty excessive is unique. Now, the reason that these exaggerated claims are a problem for Russia or any military, but in this case, it's Russia, is when you look at Kupyansk right here, We'll zoom in a bit more. So when Russia said they held this whole area, and they report that up the chain of command, when they still need troops to secure the city, 1, 2, 3 levels up the chain of command is going to say, but why? Don't you already control it? The assault operation is done. Now we're consolidating along, say, the western edge of the city. So reinforcements start to be sent to other areas. You can call this, quote, mission accomplished, right? If one unit was assigned to take Kupyansk and they did, then they're not going to backfill that unit for a little while. They're not going to continue sending resupplies to that area because you use a different type and a different amount of equipment during offensive assault operations than when you're digging in and trying to hold terrain. So it completely changes the dynamic. You've got another one here where, again, as Russian forces are in Kupyansk trying to battle in the city center, they've reported up the chain of command that they already hold all of that. So when they call for an airstrike on a building held by Ukraine or a drone strike or whatever it might be, that's going to at the very least get questioned somewhere. They're going to say, wait a minute, are we sure about those coordinates? Because that looks like territory that we have taken and held now for a couple months. Now, they might be able to sort that out, of course, right, and still be willing to drop that munition, but at the very least makes it a little bit confusing, and you're going to have somebody, drone pilot, actual pilot, somewhere along that kill chain saying, we need to probably double check this before we drop a munition, and it slows it down, if not stops it altogether. And the last one here that I feel like gets overlooked a lot is Russia has their supply chain needing to move forward to keep up with the front line, right? Let's say they feel comfortable having all of their supply, and we're making up a number here, 10 kilometers behind the front. All right, so they're leaving it 10 kilometers behind Kupyansk. When all of a sudden news comes in that they have pushed Ukraine out of Kupyansk, the supply lines, medics, communications, logistics depots, all of that might feel comfortable moving up. They need to move up to continue providing the level of service that they are. So when they move up that extra 2, 3, 4, 5 kilometers, they just put themselves directly in range of all of those Ukrainian drones that they were trying to stay out of the range of. Starting to see how this Kupyansk issue played out. And now we've got the same situation in 5 different areas along the front. So continuing on here with some pushback from the Ukrainian side, we got Russian mill blogger Mirshakov says, quote, the enemy reports that they captured Borova. They're conducting battles in the direction of Shevchenko and are engaged in street battles in Liman. I've not seen such nonsense from them in a long time. He says, quote, of course, they didn't capture anything of what they announced, but these borrowed victories, when they first report a capture and then actually captured a year later, have reached a new level. He said, in principle, if they keep coming up with such nonsense, it's to our advantage because they'll make a lot of mistakes and suffer even greater losses. Then they even get promotions for these borrowed victories. I liked the deep state map assessment here where they said, quote, the Russians decided that there is no need to even run there with a flag. It's enough to film some infantry movements 25 kilometers away, montage a reconnaissance drone flight over Borova itself, and voila, as they say, mission accomplished. They say with such methods, they'll take Kyiv tomorrow too. And then the Russian side here, we have veteran notes and mill blogger pushing back on this, saying this is a problem. And that was kind of the general theme we've seen across Russian accounts with this, is they're not celebrating it. They're saying, guys, stop it. That doesn't help. It makes things worse. Veteran note says, quote, underestimating the enemy and being arrogant towards him is the most fundamental and first mistake, which almost always leads to serious consequences in the future. He says if at the beginning of the war, roughly the first 6 months, there was general chaos, it was still possible to psychologically manipulate the Ukrainians with all sorts of triumphant posts. But now, in the 5th year of the war, it's necessary to move on to serious analysis, where we're headed. So what he's getting at there is there was so many conflicting reports and not a lot of great resources, and people were still kind of sifting through who was reliable and who wasn't, that for a period of time, call it weeks or months at the beginning of the war, you could say something and enough people would believe it. So the Russian Ministry of Defense could claim any number of things and there weren't enough viable sources pushing back on it. That hasn't been the case for a long time now. He says, quote, everything that people of the country are seeing now doesn't fit into the declared paradigm of demilitarizing Ukraine. And all of this nonsense from the defenders about, quote, everything's fine just looks like utter nonsense, especially after a Ukrainian drone flies into a window in Moscow. there's something to this. And we've talked in a lot of videos recently how we're seeing a bit of a shift in terms of momentum on the battlefield. Ukraine's starting to carry out more deep strikes, effective deep strikes inside of Russian territory. Of course, we had a significant attack in Moscow, the largest of the war, just a couple days ago. And now, right on top of all of that, we've got Russia fabricating battlefield advances to where even their own supporters are saying, guys, this is too obvious. Stop doing this. There's very clearly a change playing out right now. It's hard to tell what this means big picture or how this will play out over the course of the war. But all of this piling on one after the other is notable. It's definitely putting the conflict in a different place today than it's been really ever. But that's all we got for now. Again, for those interested in the Hartia fundraiser, we'll link that in the description and pinned comment below. Not personally involved in that one at all, just a good group of guys and, of course, a good unit out there fighting in the East. Thanks for watching. We'll see y'all next time.